Elsewhere, I'm well aware how much time we spent on the Cowboys' loss to San Francisco yesterday, but you'll forgive me if I feel like this is a topic worth spending some time on unpacking. It's what we do in a podcast, right? We unpack things, we get to the bottom of it. Dallas Cowboys lose 42-10 out in San Francisco on Sunday night, and I think anybody can tell you it's not that they lost to the best team in the league. It's that it was one of the biggest no-shows in recent Cowboys memory. Less than 200 yards of offense, 10 points, the vaunted defense getting gashed for 400 plus yards. Yeah, it's as bad as it looked. It might have been worse than it looked. And so I think it's a game that is deserving of some harsh criticism, is deserving of the conversation that's taking place, which is basically an existential crisis between the Cowboys organization and their fan base. And if you don't believe me, you can see it all over every form of media in the world on Monday in reaction to this game. We're going to go through some of it. We're going to try to parse through what is immediate overreaction and angst, and what is a very valid concern for a team that had so much hype, that had so much promise, that fell so flat. So let's start it out. We're still going to call it Twitter. I'm too far into it at this point. It's been like 15 years. The tweets were flying, as you might expect. I want to start this off not from any angry fan or analyst or journalist, but from Micah Parsons himself, the best player on this team, the defensive player of the year candidate, the guy who sets the tone on the defensive side of the ball. Cowboys defense completely no showing. And it's Micah Parsons who after the game said, I don't think the 49ers are at a higher level than us. I think we're the same caliber playoff team, same talent, same standards. I just feel like we need to reconsider and fix some things. The score doesn't show what happened out there. Now, over the course of this, we're going to get to some overreactions and some things I think people are going too far with. Micah, I don't think you're going far enough, man. I think the score shows exactly what happens with this game. And I think there needs to be a reckoning of some sort. Like the Cowboys season is not over, but to play that game and act like you're a couple catches or some tweaks or some alignments away from coming out with a different result, I just don't know that it's reality. Again, 42 points. The Niners scored more points in week 5 than the Cowboys' previous 4 opponents had combined. It's just not what we're used to seeing. And at the risk of sounding reactionary, which that's the point here, but this is a troubling trend for the Dallas defense. I know that not every opponent is going to be San Francisco, but since Trayvon Diggs got hurt after the second game of the season, Cowboys are allowing 358 yards per game. That's including a dominant performance against a woeful New England team based on the last 3 games of evidence. And that includes, remember, an Arizona team that's 1-4. So not a juggernaut by any means. Be good enough for 23rd in the league to this point. Dominant start in the first 2 weeks. It hasn't been pretty for going on 3 weeks now, and that's even with a really nice performance against New England sandwich in there. The Cowboys had 10 sacks and 7 takeaways in their first 2 games. They have 5 sacks in their first 3 games. I don't think you can attribute all of it to losing Trayvon Diggs. But for all the talk of how dominant the Dallas defense was, including from yours truly, I include myself in this, it might not be the worst unit in the league, but some serious soul searching needs to happen on that side of the ball, because the unit we've seen for the better part of a month now, particularly in 2 losses, is a far cry from what we were expecting to see all season long. I don't think it's enough of a reaction from Micah Parsons to say that the score doesn't really show what happened out there, because I think it absolutely does. Now, let's get into some other takes that are flying around right now. Mike McCarthy is going to catch hell for this. And I get it, because there's one big variable, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, one big variable for the Cowboys. Wasn't there last year, is there this year, and that's Mike McCarthy taking over play calling duties. It was a topic of conversation all offseason, and it went to the back burner with the way the Cowboys were winning dominantly. Even in the game against Arizona, you get down to the red zone 5 times, you simply don't punch it in. The Cowboys offense had been good enough, getting to the red zone more than anybody in the league, scoring 25 points a game without the defense's help. But in a situation like this, where the offense gains 9 yards on its first 10 plays, punts on 3 of its first 4 possessions, scores 10 points, doesn't manage 200 yards of offense, it's going to be called into question. I am not convinced that it is an overreaction. Now, does that mean the Cowboys offense is going to be this bad in every game that they play? No. But the trends are troubling. We know Mike McCarthy is a West Coast offense disciple. We know the West Coast offense is all about short, timely, efficient passes, using the passing game as an addition to the running game. But even for this, it's a little much. The downfield element of the Cowboys offense is completely gone. Dak Prescott's 26-yard touchdown pass to Kevontae Turpin and his 29-yard pickup with CeeDee Lamb at the start of the third quarter are just his 6th and 7th explosive plays where the ball traveled 15 or more yards in the air. If that sounded like a mouthful, I'm basically saying the Cowboys aren't completing passes downfield this season. Just 7 on the year. Dak, I guess to his credit, tried to test San Francisco deep in this game. It absolutely didn't work. The deep shot to Brandon Cooks that traveled out of bounds toward the end of the first half. The incredibly questionable decision to throw deep into double coverage that was easily picked off. At that point, I think Dak was just pressing for some kind of big play. But I don't think it's realistic to expect an offense to consistently march the field, nickel and diming the ball. And we're going to get into Dak in way greater detail, but it's not fair to ask any quarterback to do that on a week in and week out basis. Dak Prescott's been doing it really well for most of this year. The Cowboys led the league in third down conversion percentage coming into this game. But you see the problem when that is your game plan against an elite defense. 3rd and 5, you call a crossing route that's 3 yards down the field. You expect a guy to break a tackle against the best linebacker core in the NFL. I don't think it's realistic to play offense consistently and be successful without some explosive element to your passing game. Maybe that's why CeeDee Lamb looked as frustrated as I've ever seen him in this game. Despondent. Finished this game with 49 yards, 4 catches, couldn't establish any sort of connection with Prescott. Really hasn't been a feature of a game plan since week 2 against the New York Jets. I mean, Brandon Cooks was brought here for a reason, or so I thought. It's not always going to be this hard because not every defense is San Francisco, but I don't think it's realistic to play this way, to have Dak Prescott with his lowest average yards per attempt of his career, less than 6 heading into this game, and it didn't get a hell of a lot better against San Francisco. It's about to get really interesting because, in case you haven't heard, the Cowboys' next game is against the Los Angeles Chargers and their former offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, the guy who was relieved of his duties because, as good as it was statistically, the Cowboys' offense wasn't doing enough. Now, I'm not going to declare a winner or a loser in this debate right now because, to the Cowboys' credit, a big part of the reason they moved on from Kellen Moore was a lack of success against San Francisco. Cowboys were dispatched from the postseason 2 years in a row by the Niners. Kellen Moore's offense averaged 15 points per game in those 2 losses, just 12 in the most recent one. So maybe the rational take is just, however unfortunate it might be, if you like the Cowboys, the Niners own them, regardless of who's calling the plays. But there's going to be a very fun flashpoint for Mike McCarthy and Kellen Moore going against each other at a crossroads in each of these teams' season. A very popular criticism of Kellen's offenses when he was in Dallas is that he got a little too cute, tried to be a little too creative when maybe he didn't need to be. He looks like the same guy in LA. If you've watched the Chargers at all this year, very explosive, very fun, a tendency for trickery and outside the box thinking, maybe where there doesn't need to be any, but I have a feeling Kellen's going to have some things up his sleeve for his old employer. And whatever the dialogue might be right now, if Mike McCarthy gets out-called, out-schemed by the guy he ran out of town, then I think all reactions are on the table. Moving on to another overreaction in the Cowboys Twitter sphere, in the Cowboys fan base, whatever you want to call it. We touched on it already, but this Dallas defense, say whatever you want, it just hasn't looked the same since Trayvon Diggs got hurt. It's not just the 49ers. We talked about the Cardinals. We talked about 200 rushing yards given up to Arizona, 170 rushing yards given up to San Francisco. And the thing that I think is really interesting, mentioning Micah Parsons, as good as this pass rush is, it hasn't delivered to the degree that they needed to. And I mean, it says a lot about the standard that they've set, but that is supposed to be the driving force of this team. Honestly, more so than anything that happens on offense, the Cowboys' ability to get to the opposing quarterback, fluster him, force him into mistakes, that's supposed to be their calling card. They ran away with the Week 4 game against New England because of that, because Mac Jones just lost his mind trying to deal with this pressure. Didn't come close to happening against San Francisco. Pro Football Focus credits the Cowboys with 5 pressures and no sacks of Brock Purdy in true drop back situations. Like when it was obvious that Brock was going to drop back and throw and there was no play action, no trickery going on, 5 pressures and no sacks. Maybe you'll remember Brock Purdy threw quite a bit for almost 300 yards in this game. I went back and watched it again because I forgot. I was like, well, if this is the case, I know the Cowboys sacked him. When did it happen? It happened on a slow developing play action jet sweep where Brock Purdy was holding the ball for a while and Jaron Kearse, a safety, got the sack. So that's what the Cowboys were dealing with in this game. I'll say it for the 100th time. It's not always going to be San Francisco, but especially with your secondary compromised, with Leighton Vander Esch now potentially missing time, the report is that he could miss a month or more with a neck injury. The pass rush has to get home. There's no other option. I think there are enough issues on the back end. Cowboys safeties, Kearse, Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, quietly, well, not so quietly anymore, but had been quietly not having the best stretch. It's loud and clear, whether you want to talk about lining up offside, whether you want to talk about unnecessary roughness penalties on third down, or just not having good coverage. It is quietly an issue. Fortunately for the Cowboys, I still think this pass rush is good enough to take advantage of most protection schemes, and that's why I'm not panicking. But this is the type of thing that you see in the playoffs, and that's why people are so concerned, and it's only week 6. Moving on to the next overreaction, which maybe doesn't feel like an overreaction. Summing up almost 30 years of futility in 2 beautiful sentences. The Cowboys will probably make the playoffs and win maybe 1 game. I want more than that, man. It's not enough anymore. The repeat effect, I think, is what makes this so tough to swallow. 27 years of futility, 27 years since a conference title game appearance, let alone a Super Bowl. And you can't, it's hard to explain this away. We all know that you have bad games. We all know that teams can bounce back. But this is the team that's ended their season. This is the type of team that will be in the playoffs come January. I can think back a couple years. Cowboys lose a head scratcher to Denver. Bad. Terrible. And you say, well, that was really weird, but maybe their head wasn't in the game. Maybe they just weren't as focused as they should have been. It'll all be all right. Sure enough, it wasn't all right. Last year, things are rolling. Things are looking good. In the middle of the home stretch of the season, they give up a lead to Jacksonville. They go to overtime. They lose the game on a pick 6. Looking for explanations, looking for why we'll play better, why this won't happen when it matters. To lose a game with so much focus on it, with so much emphasis on it being a measuring stick, and to a team that you've already seen beat you in the playoffs. I understand why anybody would feel dejected about it going any other way. I really don't think it's an overreaction. And that's what I can't wait to see from the Cowboys moving forward is what can you do to make people forget that this game happened? It's a long season. I think they will win games. I think they're a playoff team. The Cowboys are a playoff team. Let's not get it twisted. I'd be shocked if they don't find a way into the postseason. I'd be shocked if they don't play a lot of really impressive games. But knowing that this happened, where there's no injury excuse, there's no element of not being focused, any of that familiar tropes we use to make ourselves feel better about a loss. Can't lean on it here. And it's hard to get that out of your mind when you're thinking about this year going any different from any of the other 26 years. And that's, I think, what leads to as much angst as we've seen. And I don't fault you for it, Cowboy fans. All right, let's wrap this up with the biggest one, the most nuanced one, the one that I wanted help for, and that's about Dak Prescott. This overreaction, this is clearly an overreaction. Trey Lance should be the starter in Dallas. The Dak Prescott experiment has failed. Now, what I'm not going to do on this show is dive into this type of hot take nonsense that isn't productive or interesting to me. Trey Lance has 4 NFL starts. The San Francisco 49ers, that's where he came from. How fitting. Had every reason to bet on, to back a guy that they sold the farm for. They gave away so much to draft. Had every reason to lean toward him being the guy to carry them into the future, and they didn't do it. To suggest that Trey Lance or even Cooper Rush could do a better job in this spot or do a better job moving forward than Dak Prescott, who I still think is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, I think it's asinine.